Chapter 6. Jake spent the day at home with his parents. People trickled in and out to see him, all of his cousins, old friends, and some people who just came to thank him for his service. He was always a little embarrassed when people did that, but more pleased than anything else. He started getting ready for his date around 5, showering and shaving the areas around the new beard, which was coming in faster than expected. He always had a heavy 5 o'clock shadow by about 2 in the afternoon, so he'd been hopeful it would be grown in enough he wouldn't have to shave it off when it came time for the wedding. Instead of driving, he walked to Melinda's place to get her for their date. He knew her preferences, and he didn't mind walking. She was ready and waiting for him, though she looked a little nervous. "Any news on the engagement ring?" she asked. He laughed softly. "None yet. I'm sure the whole town will hear about it when he proposes, though. They're both crazy." "They are." She shook her head, stepping out and closing the door behind her. "You didn't bring your truck?" He shook his head. "Nah. You like to walk." "I like to walk." "Let's walk together." "Works for me." "Is there live music tonight?" "Do you know?" "I have no idea what we're walking into at the pub, but I know we'll have fun regardless." He was hopeful for live music, but with Ivy gone, he wasn't sure if they'd been able to fill in her scheduled spots. Melinda smiled. "You know? I think we will have fun. I wonder how many times you're going to be called Bobling." "None. I have a secret weapon." "You do?" He nodded. "I ordered a whole pack of hello, my name is stickers from Amazon. I have one all filled out in my pocket, and as soon as we walk into the pub, I'm putting it on." "I think that's a great idea. Where are your nerd glasses and pocket protector? Do you have a graphing calculator in your pocket?" Melinda looked at him innocently as she waited for a response. "Whatever. At least people won't call me Bobling. I'm not letting you shame me into not wearing it. I refuse to be called Bobling one more time." She laughed softly. "And you think a name tag is going to stop people from calling you that? Good luck." Jake frowned at her. "You could be a little more supportive, you know." "I know. But I also know it's not going to work. I have to do something, and this is what I thought of." "Well, good luck, then. Are you going to be embarrassed to be seen with me with a sticker with my name written on it?" She shook her head. "If you won't be embarrassed, then I won't either." She couldn't wait to see what all happened, though. The 5-minute walk passed quickly, and he held the door of the pub for her, letting her precede him into the place. They were quickly seated, and he looked at the menu, seeing that it had changed a lot in the time he'd been gone. "I'm going to have to figure out what I want. It's been too long since I came here." He pulled the sticker out of his pocket and applied it to the right side of his shirt, below his shoulder. Melinda grinned at him and couldn't resist teasing just a little. "That's really attractive." He glanced down at it, not minding teasing. He'd grown up a Quinn, and it was a way of life for them. "Thanks. I think it looks good." Maggie Quinn, one of Jake's many cousins, walked to the table. "Bobling? Is that you? I heard you were back in town." "Hey, Maggie." "Yeah, I'm back, but it's Jake now. I gave up Bobling when I started shaving." Maggie laughed. "We'll see how that flies. Did you tell Grandma yet?" "Yeah, and she said she'd try." Jake had no confidence it would work, but he was going to try at least. "Oh, sure she will." Maggie shook her head, looking at Melinda for a moment. "What can I get you to drink?" "I want a water," Jake said. "Me too," Melinda replied. She wasn't about to let her new personal trainer see her getting a full sugar soft drink, and artificial sweeteners made her sick. "Back in a minute." Maggie hurried away to get their drinks. "Does Maggie usually wait tables?" Jake asked. I thought she tended bar most of the time. She does. I have no idea why she came to the table. Maybe she's helping out whoever is waiting on us, or she wanted to see her favorite cousin. Oh, I doubt if I'm Maggie's favorite. He shrugged. We were never particularly close. I don't dislike her or anything, we just didn't hang out together. That makes sense. You did have 19 other cousins to choose from. Maggie brought their drinks over. Roberta is going to be waiting on you, but a big party came in just before you, so I told her I'd get your drink orders. Had to see my favorite cousin anyway. You say that to all your cousins, Jake said. Sure do. Maggie wandered back over and walked behind the bar. Melinda took a sip of her water as she studied her menu. What do I want? He shrugged. I think I'm going with the special of the day. You can never go wrong with a special. She pursed her lips. Good point. I'll do the special, too. She stacked her menu atop his, wondering why he'd asked her out. He was the golden prince of the Quinn family, from what she could tell. Well, maybe not the whole Quinn family, but definitely the Bob Quinn branch. Looks like a band is setting up. Good. You'll have to dance with me. I'd like that. Do you dance well? He shrugged. I'm adequate. I can slow dance with the best of them. Slow dancing sounds right up my alley. Less chance to embarrass myself. Are you clumsy? He asked. My sister Renee can trip over a speck of lint. She grinned. I'm not like that, for sure, but I'm not super light on my feet either. I want to be, but I didn't want to be enough to take dance lessons or anything. Well, I guess I'll see if you dance on my feet later. I'll do my very best not to. Roberta came over then, pushing a wisp of hair out of her face with the back of her wrist. Oh, good. You have drinks. What can I get you? 2 specials, Jake told her. Sounds good. I'll put that in. Save room for dessert. There's a delicious pineapple upside-down cake tonight with vanilla ice cream. Roberta hurried away. I wonder how long she's worked here, Jake said. I've never seen her. Maybe she took over for Ivy. Melinda had no idea. Maybe. I wish Ivy hadn't already been gone when I got home, but I'm glad she's following her dream. She was a big draw for this place. I hope their revenue doesn't go down now that she's gone. I doubt it will. They have a fabulous chef, and David is still supplying the food. He's amazing. Wait. Who is David? Jake frowned. Dad doesn't have you buying your food from my cousin David? Melinda shook her head. He's always been pretty hands-off about the restaurant. Well, then you need to talk to David Quinn. He will give you a good price and very good quality food. She pulled her phone out and tapped his cousin's name into her notes. I will call him first thing Monday morning. We want the best. You'll get it from him. Jake took a sip of his water. I hear a slow song. Dance with me. Melinda drew a deep breath. She enjoyed dancing, but being that close to Jake was, well, intimidating. She finally nodded and got to her feet, walking with him toward the dance floor. As soon as he pulled her into his arms, she knew she was lost. His touch, it sent electricity shooting through her and made her feel like she was on fire from head to toe. He pulled her closer, his chin resting on top of her head. I've been wanting to hold you since I saw you in my dad's office. You have? She asked, pulling away a bit so she could look up into his eyes. He nodded. I thought you were beautiful then, but now I think you're smart and beautiful. That's a combination no man can resist. She blushed, moving back to where her head rested on his shoulder. He felt something for her, too. Maybe she was as crazy as Ambrosia, but she wanted more from him, so much more. After the dance, they returned to the table, and she couldn't keep her eyes off him. It had been hard before the dance, but now she knew she was his for the asking. "We'll have to do that again soon," he said softly. "I like holding you in my arms, Melinda." "Not as much as I like being held," she mumbled under her breath. His grin widened. "I wish the gym was in order so I could train you Monday morning. I can think of ways to help you hold the weights just right." She laughed. "I'm not sure that's what your father had in mind when he hired you to be the trainer for the hotel." "Probably not. But I like the idea. How about having lunch with me on Monday?" "I'd like that." "Do you go to church?" he asked. She frowned at the question. It seemed like an odd one to her. "I usually do unless I'm stuck with the morning shift on Sunday for some reason. Like if one of her sous chefs called in sick." She never scheduled herself for Sunday morning. "Would you like to maybe have lunch after? We could have a picnic and drive four-wheelers up into the mountains." "That's such a cliché thing to do here in Quinn Valley. What if I want to go to Lewiston and drag you all over the shopping mall?" "I'd do it. I just want to spend more time with you. I truly don't care what we do." She smiled. "Well, I'm not much of a shopper, but I would love to cook supper for you, and maybe we could watch a movie. I love being outside, but I would feel like the whole town was watching us. I want to have a little time to get used to this first." "This?" She waved her hand between them, not having a better word. "This. Whatever it is that is building between us." "Oh, this." She made a face. "You're being difficult on purpose." Jake grinned. "I do that more than I should probably." "Well, stop." He laughed. "If I stopped, what would you have to complain about?" "I don't like to complain," Melinda said with a frown. "Don't be a pain in my glutes, Bobling Jake Quinn." He wrinkled his nose. "As long as you promise never to call me Bobling again, I will be nicer." She grinned. "I know your Achilles heel now, Mr. Quinn. Don't think I won't threaten to stab it repeatedly." Roberta came by then and pushed their plates in front of them. "I heard nothing about stabbing. I will not be a witness. No one can make me." She smiled sweetly. "Can I get you anything else? Other than more water?" Melinda bit her lip against a laugh. "Water would be great, but nothing else for me." Jake looked down at the fish and chips in front of him. "Vinegar and ketchup." "I'll be right back." Roberta hurried away. "Try not to end up dead in a ditch somewhere, would you? I think our friend Roberta there would be happy to testify that she heard me threaten to stab you. Now I have something to hold over you. We're even." Melinda frowned at him. "You're being a pain again, Bobling." "I've never kicked a woman, but I'm seriously thinking about it at this moment." "How cruel." "That would be abuse." She picked up a chip and popped it into her mouth. "These are yummy." "I'm not surprised," Jake said. "I've been getting emails about the new chef and the changes she's made for almost a year. So glad you let me drag you here, just so I could eat. You could have come alone or with any number of sisters or cousins. Wouldn't have been half as much fun without your eyes to stare into." She blushed, shaking her head. "You shouldn't say things like that to me." "Why not?" "I work for your father." "So do I. Dad is all for a relationship between us." "Trust me." Melinda raised an eyebrow. "How do you know?" "He dragged you to the house for dinner, to even up the numbers at my welcome home dinner. He was doing his best to matchmake." "I promise." "I wonder why." Melinda shook her head. "I don't think he even knew I was his employee until a few weeks ago." Jake grinned. "Dad knows everyone on the payroll, down to the kids who lifeguard there. You'd be surprised at how meticulously he runs things." "Really?" "Oh yeah. He's always been that way. He took the vinegar from Roberta and sprinkled it liberally on his fish. Thank you. Let me know if you need anything else. We will. Jake ate a bite of fish and sighed. I love fish and chips. Always have. Me too. Melinda put a bit of the vinegar on her own fish. I'm a bit of a foodie. It's the real reason I became a chef. So, I could cook for me. He laughed. Well, how's this for you? He held up a piece of the fish. They're actually done perfectly. They're a golden brown, but not a dark brown, giving it the crunch you want. The chips are just right as well. Whoever is running that kitchen knows her stuff. I agree. He took another bite. After we finish eating, we're dancing again. Just so you know. Thanks for the warning. Oh, you like warnings? When I walk you home tonight, I'm kissing you goodnight, and I plan to knock you out of your socks when I do. Out of my socks, huh? Can we both go to church tomorrow if we kissed sockless tonight? Well, we'll start out kissing with socks on, and I don't think Blake will mind too much as long as we keep other clothes on. Socks aren't as mandatory as underwear and stuff. She laughed. I never know what's going to come out of your mouth. That's good, right? I keep you guessing? Sawyer. Sorry to interrupt, Jackson was standing beside the table, and he sounded out of breath. I got the ring. Jake stared at the ring in his former commander's hand. How'd you get them to make it so fast? Oh, I paid an expedited fee. I can't risk the chance that Ambrosia is going to meet someone else. What do you think? Does it look good? Is that moonstone and sapphire? Jake asked. He knew next to nothing about crystals except that sapphire was blue. It is. I'm going to go ask her to marry me right now. But what am I going to do if she throws something at my head like she did last night? Didn't she just throw a slipper? Jackson nodded. Yeah, but it's what she had at hand. What if she has a plate or a glass or something that could hurt me? Why don't you ask her to go for a walk? There's that park down the street from her shop. If you take her there, she won't have anything to throw unless she arms herself first, and if she does that, you're doomed anyway. Jake grinned, his hand going to cover Melinda's. That's probably true. You don't think she'll scream at me, do you? I have no idea. I barely know her. She's owned that shop for as long as I can remember, but I know next to nothing else about her. Except that she was insane, but everyone in town knew that. Except Jackson, of course, but he was sure the other man would figure it out soon enough. Well, wish me luck, then. When next you see me, I hope to be an engaged man. And maybe I can talk her into getting married Monday. Do you know if there's a waiting period in Idaho? Jake shrugged. I really don't know. I've never been married in Idaho. Or anywhere else, for that matter. I guess I can Google it on my way to see her. Jackson took a deep breath. My hand is shaking. She's so special, and I'm just a Marine. Go. You're going to make yourself more nervous if you keep waiting. All right. All right. Jackson hurried out the door. As soon as he was gone, Jake looked at Melinda and shook his head. I don't know what the man is thinking, but if he's happy, then I don't know that I want to interfere. He sure looks like he's happy. Melinda shrugged. I'm not sure I understand, but I'm glad she makes him happy. I truly believe there's a love for everyone out there, and apparently, Jackson is the love for Ambrosia. I'm still not sure how Ambrosia feels about Jackson. I know that she's the love for him, though, as hard as it is for me to comprehend, he truly loves her. I watched him fall. I think it's sweet. Sweet and a little scary, though, right? Jake asked. Definitely a little scary. Maggie walked back to their table. Jake, is that your friend who's courting Ambrosia? I don't know what other word to use for what that man is doing. That is. He's heading to her place right now with an engagement ring, and he hopes to talk her into marrying him on Monday, if there's no waiting period in Idaho. Maggie laughed, shaking her head. There is no waiting period in Idaho. Then I might just be a best man on Monday. I also might be visiting my friend in the hospital after Ambrosia throws a brick at his head. It could really go either way. Let's hope for the best. Maggie hurried back to the bar, but she was shaking her head the entire way. Jake ate the last of his fish, and he noticed Melinda was finished as well. Let's dance. Melinda nodded, knowing what to expect this time. Her legs were about to turn into noodles, and she was going to burn from head to toe. It was just how dancing with Jake went. Chapter 7. It was after 10 when they left the pub, Melinda's hand firmly in Jake's. I had an amazing time, he said to her. She nodded, her face flushed from the dancing and laughter. I did, too. I wanted the night to last forever. So, are we on for lunch tomorrow? And a movie day? We are. I haven't decided what I'm making yet, but it'll be something yummy. Sounds good to me. Jake was always up for a good home-cooked meal. He'd had so few in the past several years. Can I bring anything? She shook her head. No, I'll handle it all. Be thinking about the movie you want to watch. Melinda was concocting the perfect picnic. They'd go to her backyard, and they'd sit on a quilt on the ground. Fried chicken, maybe? No, too cliché. I'll think of something. The closer they got to her house, the faster her heart beat. Knowing he was planning to kiss her was nice to prepare for it, but it was too long from the time he'd told her he was going to do it until he actually did it. It was making her crazy thinking about how it would be. Jake grinned over at her, so happy he'd met her his first day back. She was pretty darn special. Of course, he wasn't on his way to Lewiston to get a ring yet, but so far, so good. When they reached her front step, he turned to her, looking down into her eyes. You have the prettiest green eyes I've ever seen. I haven't been able to stop looking at them all night. You trying to flatter me? Melinda asked nervously. Nope. Just feeling the need to speak my truth. Now, get over here. I'm less than a foot from you now. What do you want from me? She shook her head in exasperation. Really, did he expect her to move so close to him that they felt like they were one person? Though it sounded lovely, she didn't think it was a good idea at all. He chuckled. You know exactly what I want. He caught her by the hips and pulled her to him. Now, hush up and close your eyes. What if I like to kiss with my eyes open? He sighed. Are you always going to be this argumentative? He asked. Probably not. I just talk more when I'm nervous. Are you nervous about our first kiss? Jake asked, understanding finally what her problem was. Well, yeah. Then let's get it over with. He quickly lowered his head, brushing his lips across hers. When she sighed a little, he slanted his head and deepened the kiss, pulling her even closer toward him. Melinda wrapped her arms around his neck and sank into him, feeling as if her entire body was on fire. The man sure could kiss, but it was more than that. His touch was almost magic to her. When he finally broke off the kiss, Jake rested his forehead against hers. Well, that sure answered some questions. There were questions? She was in a bit of a daze and had no earthly clue what the man was talking about. Haven't you been wondering if we'd be physically compatible? Well, I have, and now I know. We would definitely be compatible. Is it good we know that? She asked. Oh, yeah. Now we can move forward with all of our information in our hands. It'll be better that way. She sighed. Do you want to come in for a drink? I'm good. I should get home. Living with my parents is not ideal for dating. Well, I wasn't inviting you to spend the night, you know. She shook her head. Men. He just laughed, dipping his head and kissing her quickly. Good night, Melinda. Dream of me. Never. Even as she went inside and closed the door behind her, she knew she'd lied. There was no way she would be able to think of anything else, and dreams would grow of it. Bobling Jake Quinn was one sexy Marine. Asterisk. Jake was up early, fixing himself a bowl of cereal for breakfast. Without his sisters around, he'd be feeding himself, and that was just fine with him. He didn't care that his mother didn't cook. He never had. He was just sitting down to eat when his mother came into the room. How was your date? Have I told you yet I'm glad you're home safe and sound? Once or twice, and it was good. He felt strange having his mother question him about his dates as she had when he was in high school. Wasn't he just a little too old for that? Good? Is that all you're going to tell me? April Lynn shook her head. I'm not asking if you rocked the headboard. Just wondering if the two of you hit it off. Jake spewed his orange juice back into the glass. Rocked the headboard? You realize you're my mother, right? You realize how you were made, right? April Lynn shook her head. You didn't invent sex, Bobling. Jake, he corrected automatically, refusing to even look at his mother. He felt the sex talk coming on again, and he really didn't need it. He took another bite of his cereal. I'm going to Melinda's place for lunch, and we'll probably watch some movies this afternoon. Movies, huh? All right. If that's what you want to tell me, that's just fine. She walked across the kitchen and made herself some toast, spreading butter on it. You're sitting with us at church, though, right? Oh, absolutely. Jake would be happy to do anything, as long as his mother stopped talking about sex. That's all he asked for in life. His dad stepped into the room then. You were out late, Bobling. I hope you had a good time. Jake sighed, ignoring the use of the ridiculous name he hated and making a mental note to put on one of his name tags before church. We had a really nice time. It was good to go to the pub after so long. Did they have live music and dancing last night? April Lynn asked. They did. It wasn't anything like what I've heard from Ivy, but it was decent. And it had given him a chance to dance the night away with the most beautiful woman in the place. He could never complain about that. Bob walked to the refrigerator and got himself an orange and some yogurt. It was the healthiest breakfast Jake had ever seen his father eat. You're going to like Blake as a pastor, Bob said. He's not only a great future husband for Riley, he's a good speaker. I think that's great. I haven't heard a good sermon in a very long time. Jake got to his feet. I'm going to go put one of my name tags on, and then I'll be ready. April Lynn laughed. Do you really think that those name tags are going to work to keep people from calling you Bobling? I don't think you're going to be happy with the results. Well, I have to at least try. I'm going to go nuts if people keep calling me that. Jake went into his room and affixed a name tag to his dress shirt. I'm going to walk to church, he called as he headed for the front door. We'll walk with you, Bob replied. Jake smiled. I'm glad. It's really good for your heart to walk. Bob shrugged. I know it is. That doesn't mean I want to do it. You'll get to the point you crave exercise. You'll see. I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but I hope so. April Lynn grabbed a pair of dress shoes and stuffed them into her oversized purse, putting sneakers on her feet. This way, I can look nice for church and not have sore feet. The three of them walked through the quiet streets together. The tourists hadn't taken over the town for the entire day yet. It's strange to see these familiar streets. I thought more would have changed while I was gone. Bob smiled. That's what I like best about Quinn Valley. Things rarely change. When they got to the church, Jake went in, separating from his parents, but knowing he'd return to sit with them. Riley was standing beside Blake at the front of the church. "Well, there's my little sister, the future pastor's wife." Riley wrinkled her nose. "I'm going to make a lousy pastor's wife." Blake shook his head. "You're going to be the best pastor's wife I'll ever have." Jake smiled at that, nodding emphatically. "I'm going to be proud to call you my brother." "Unlike Siren?" Riley asked with a grin. "I can deal with Siren. He's making me an uncle after all." Jake looked around for Melinda and spotted her across the room, talking to his cousin David. He wanted to go over and put his arm around her, staking his claim, but he couldn't. Not yet anyway. He looked around again, spotting Jackson looking awfully proud of himself, Ambrosia right beside him. Jackson took Ambrosia's hand and led her toward Jake. She said yes. "I'm getting married tomorrow." Jake smiled, shaking hands with Jackson. "I'm happy for you." Ambrosia made a face. "What about me? Are you happy this old spinster is finally going to lose her flower?" When lightning didn't strike the church, Jake nodded. "Very happy for you, Miss Ambrosia. I know Jackson will be a good husband to you." "He'd better be, or I'll put a whammy on him." "Of course you will. I would expect nothing less." "No whammies will be needed. I will worship you as the exotic princess you are." Jackson took her hand and brought it to his lips. "How about being my best man?" "Oh, I wouldn't have it any other way." "Are you writing your own vows?" Jake knew he shouldn't have asked, because it might put ideas in their heads, but he wanted to hear whatever the two of them came up with. Ambrosia grinned. "I hadn't thought of that, but I sure will now. I'm writing my own vows." Jackson nodded. "I am already thinking about mine. They'll be wonderful." "Is Blake performing the ceremony?" Jake asked. "He is. It'll be at 5. Bring a date." Jackson winked at Jake. Jake's eyes automatically went to Melinda. He wondered if she was free. "I'll do that." He wandered away from them and toward Melinda, who had finished her conversation with David. "Hello there." Melinda grinned at him, her eyes lighting up. "I like your name tag." "Me too." He wasn't going to let her make fun of it. "Are you working at 5 tomorrow?" "No, I get off at 4 tomorrow." "Why?" "How would you like to be my date for a wedding?" he asked, casually. She clapped her hands together excitedly. "Jackson and Ambrosia?" "Yup. They're getting married, and I'm the best man. At least you don't have to visit him in the hospital." Jake looked around and then leaned toward her so only she could hear. "I got them to write their own vows." Melinda covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh, my. That's going to be amazing. Won't it?" They were invited to take their seats then, so he hurried off toward his family after promising to see her right after the service. He couldn't wait to spend time with her. During the sermon, Jake realized his father was right. Blake was a very good speaker, and it wasn't hard to listen to him at all. The topic of the sermon was loving your enemy, and Jake thought about the men he'd had to kill while in Iraq and Afghanistan. It had been hard, and many of their faces still haunted him. Loving your enemy, it wasn't something a Marine could really do. But he wasn't a Marine anymore, and he would do his very best. He took a deep breath, trying to think about the future and not the horrible days of war that were behind him. After the sermon, he talked to many of the people in town who hadn't recognized him until they saw him with his parents. "Bobling, it's so good to see you. Why do you have that 'my name is Jake' name tag on? I know you're Bobling. Are you trying to hide your real identity?" A friend of his grandmother's asked. He simply smiled. I've been using the name Jake instead of Bobling while I've been in the military. I was hoping I could teach the people of Quinn Valley to call me Jake as well. Even though most are too stuck in their ways to even try. The older woman narrowed her eyes at him. Are you saying I'm too old to learn to call you Jake? Oh, no, ma'am. I'd never say that. I have a great deal of respect for my elders. Fine. Jake. I'll show you just how progressive I can be. With that, she hurried away from him. Jake hated that he'd had to offend the woman, but he couldn't deal with being called Bobling for even another minute. She'd read the name tag and still called him by the ridiculous nickname. Did she think he was wearing it for his health? He talked to several other people, most of them ignoring his name tag, to call him Bobling. He wanted to scream. Finally, he found Melinda across the sanctuary, and he took her hand, not saying a word until they were out of the church. Why is it so hard to understand that I don't want to be called by that ludicrous name? I'm really not sure, but I know no one is willing to even try to call you Jake. It's really strange. Though I did hear old Mrs. Miller complaining that you had told her she was too old to change her ways. He laughed. I didn't. But I may have implied it to get her to call me Jake. She was driving me crazy, making fun of the fact that I wanted to be called something else. She's never really been known for her tact, has she? Nope. And I've known her since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. He started walking toward her house, happy that they would have some time together. Time alone, which meant no one would be calling him Bobling, and he wouldn't slowly lose his mind. What did you make for lunch? I know you love your mom's lasagna, but I thought you might like to try mine. I use Alfredo sauce and sausage instead of tomato sauce and ground beef. It has a really good flavor. I put the lasagna together, though I need to stick it in the oven for a while. I'll make a salad, and I'll pop garlic bread in the oven. We'll be eating soon, so you won't even have to complain that you're starving to death. That sounds delicious. I'm sure willing to give it a try. When they got to her house, she opened the door for him and led him inside. I'm going to throw the lasagna in the oven. Make yourself comfortable. Instead of sitting in the living room, he followed her into the kitchen, looking around. Nice kitchen. She laughed. When I bought this house, the only room I wanted an immediate remodel of was the kitchen. I wanted a chef's kitchen, and now I have one. Do you want something to drink? He nodded. Water or iced tea would be great. Grabbing a glass from a cabinet beside the sink, she filled it with ice and then added water. Here you go. You can sit while I finish getting everything ready. What if I want to watch you? She put her hands on her hips. Why do you want to watch me? Because you're beautiful and I never get enough of watching you. Melinda shook her head. Sometimes I wonder what I did for ego boosts before you came home. She couldn't deny she liked the compliments, but they were hard to believe at times. He smiled, leaning on the counter and watching her work on the salad. No idea. But I'm here for you now. I talked to Raina and Riley about the dishes you chose for their wedding, and they both said they sound great. They really are easy to please. Melinda was pleased to have people so easy for her first catering clients. Me too. Especially when people give me cookies. She sighed. You want cookies? I thought you'd never ask. Jake said, wondering if she had boxed cookies or if she'd made them from scratch. Of if she, God forbid, had no cookies at all. He wasn't sure he'd be able to keep seeing her if she had no cookies. It would be too sad. Melinda sighed. Be glad I felt like baking last night. You baked after I dropped you off? He asked, surprised. I was too hyper to sleep, and baking always soothes me. There's something about getting your hands covered in cookie dough that makes everything right with the world. Hey, you are welcome to calm yourself by baking cookies anytime. I'm really good at eating them. She shook her head, opening a cookie jar and piling several cookies on a plate. How many hours will you have to work out to get rid of these calories? She asked. He shrugged. I don't worry about that. I burn off more than anyone else I know. I just have a high metabolism. Well, I'll try not to hate you, then. Will you please sit down with your cookies before you make me crazy? Melinda wasn't sure she could stand for him to hover over her for another minute. Do I intimidate you? He asked. Yes. Is that what you want? Not particularly, but it's a good start. With a grin, Jake took his cookies into the living room and ate them. It was fun to see her with her feathers ruffled. He was quickly learning what made her tick. Chapter 8. While Jake was sitting waiting for her to finish making lunch, a small tiger kitty jumped onto his lap. You must be Kaz. I heard your mama talking about you, but she didn't bother to tell me anything. She likes to hide things from me. He stroked the cat from his head all the way to the tip of his tail, and the kitty turned in a circle and plopped down, obviously ready to nap. He shrugged. He'd been in animal bed once or twice before, and he was good at it. Everyone had to have a skill, after all. When it was time to eat, he just scooped the kitten under one arm and carried him into the kitchen with him. They went out the back door, and he was surprised to see that she'd already set the table, so to speak. The whole spread looked wonderful. If I like this lasagna better than my mom's, I can't tell her. Just so you know. Melinda laughed. I would never ask you to do that. But you can tell me, right? He grinned. I'm going to decide they're two different dishes, I think. That way I won't feel guilty. Sounds smart to me. She sank down onto the picnic basket and picked up her plate, which had already been loaded with food in a way only a chef could present a meal. I hope you like it. I know you grew up with a totally different kind of lasagna. I did. I'll let you know. He grinned at her as he used the side of his fork to get a bite of the dish. He looked at it, fascinated by how different it looked from what he'd expected. It looks and smells wonderful. Well, taste it. He grinned, slowly putting the bite into his mouth and chewing, carefully keeping his face neutral. Once he'd swallowed, he took a sip of his water before saying anything. I think that might just be the most delicious thing I have ever put in my mouth. She raised her hands in the air in triumph. I'm so glad. That was my favorite thing I taught myself to make before culinary school. I perfected it there, of course, but it was just something I needed to eat. She took a bite of her own, thrilled that he liked it. As they ate, they chatted, talking about her kitty and his time in the Marines. You served a long time, Melinda said. What kept you re-enlisting over and over? He had to think about that for a moment. I was really proud to be a Marine. I'm proud to have served my country. They helped me achieve several certifications for personal training, and I think they furthered my career outside the service. I love that I was able to live on a shoestring, because I never needed base housing or anything. So, I saved a lot in the time I served. I didn't like going to war, but I liked being able to defend the helpless, if that makes any kind of sense at all. I knew what I had to do the day the Twin Towers fell. I remember sitting in class and watching what happened, and I promised myself that day I would be defending my country one day. So, I did. I'm pretty proud to be dating a former Marine, to be honest with you. I think you did something wonderful for our country, and I know you probably have emotional scars as a result. They don't make you less, though, they make you more. Melinda reached over and covered his hand with hers, and he thought maybe she really did understand how he felt about the whole thing. He'd never really talked about it with anyone else, because it was hard to put into words. After their picnic, he helped her clean up, and then they went into the living room to watch a movie. He looked over at her with pursed lips. Don't tell me. You only watch rom-coms? She shook her head adamantly. I was hoping we could watch some superhero movies. Those are my favorites. He laughed. I hope my sisters never manage to influence you. I doubt they will. The spa people don't hang out with the restaurant people a whole lot. Roxy isn't spa. I do spend time with her, planning food for events. She's never invited me to see a movie, though. Should I feel slighted? He shook his head, sat down in the middle of her couch, and looked at her. He was hoping she'd sit on either side of him, and she looked between him and the chair, perpendicular to the couch. If I sit next to you, it doesn't mean I'm inviting you to start kissing me and stuff. It's the and stuff that has me really curious. She laughed and shook her head, taking the seat beside him and pulling up her Amazon account, where she'd already purchased all of the superhero movies. This was going to be a fun day. Asterisk. Jake was busy the following morning, because the equipment had started to come in. He asked his father for a strong man to help him out, and they got a lot of the broken machines out of the gym and put the new ones in places he wanted. As he looked around, he noted that the gym had been given a good cleaning overnight, and that pleased him. He wanted everything perfect when he was able to open for the public again. He had lunch with Melinda at noon, both of them going for tacos again. Do you ever feel bad that you don't eat in your own restaurant? I get sick of the same food every day, she responded. You eat the same food every day. I eat tacos every day, Melinda said. Who could get sick of tacos? Not me. He grinned at Siren as he placed their order. How's Roxy? Miserable and round. She wants the baby to come so badly, but not until after the wedding Saturday. She said Sunday would be a great day for him to be born. Jake nodded. Hopefully it works out that way for her. He took their food and headed back to the hotel. It was definitely convenient to have the taco truck parked adjacent to his dad's hotel. He sure couldn't complain about that. As they ate, they chatted about what they wanted to do together next. I work nights Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. Friday, I'll be prepping for the wedding all day. I'd ask you to be my date for the wedding, but it sounds like you're going to be busy. She shrugged. I'll have everything in place by the time the reception starts, so I can spend time with you then. I'll be late, because I'll have to run home and change, but not too terribly late, I wouldn't think. Sounds good to me. He bit into a chip after dipping it in the queso. Are you still planning on going to the wedding with me this afternoon? That one, I wouldn't miss for anything. I cannot wait to hear the vows they came up with. You never know. They may have decided to do traditional vows. I would weep. Copiously. Melinda sincerely hoped they not only wrote their own vows, but maybe that they pantomimed them. It would make for a very interesting wedding. Jake went back to his parents' house and put on a suit before the wedding. He was the best man, after all, though he wasn't sure what that entailed with this wedding. Hopefully just standing at the front of the church with him and nodding. He drove to pick Melinda up at her house, smiling when he saw her dress. It was pink and had little flowers on it, but it was beautiful. How could he not want to spend time with this woman? You ready for this? Is it possible to be ready for this? She asked. No idea. You clean up good, pretty lady. He leaned down and kissed her quickly. Okay, let's do this thing. She slid into the truck beside him, and he drove them to the church, having to stop several times as tourists crossed the street in unlikely and unsafe places. Would you believe I haven't gone tubing down the river yet? Are you kidding me? That was one of my favorite things about growing up in this town. Dad would take me tubing, just the two of us, every summer. I looked forward to it all year long. It was our special time together. We'll have to go sometime. I think that would be a lot of fun. She looked over at him. You're the oldest kid in your family, right? He nodded. All the girls are younger than me. Is it strange that they're all going to be married in a few days? I don't know. In some ways it is. I went off to join the military, and they were all still girls. I come back, and one is married and pregnant. Another is married. The two youngest are engaged and just waiting for me to get back for their wedding. Yeah, it's a little strange. I'm sure happy for all of them, though. He parked in front of the church and looked over at her. What about you? Oldest? She nodded. I am. I have two younger brothers. Neither are getting married, though, so it's different. He shrugged, walking around the truck to open her door, take her hand, and help her down. Her shoes had heels on them, and he didn't think she was used to wearing anything like that. Looks like Jackson is already here. Oh, good. Melinda was really excited about this wedding. She wasn't quite sure why, but she thought it might just be very entertaining. They went into the church, and he spotted Jackson at the front. Ambrosia was nowhere to be seen. Where's your blushing bride? Jake asked as he reached out and shook his friend's hand. She's in the back, getting all dolled up for me. Jackson shook his head. I still can't believe I convinced that amazing woman to marry me. I hope she knows that I don't need her to look any prettier than she does every day, because I already find her to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Jake was always surprised to hear the other man say things like that about Ambrosia. He'd never really talked to him about his taste in women, but Ambrosia seemed strange for anyone's taste. Blake had the two men get in their places, while Melinda sat down in the front pew. There were very few people there, which was sad, because Ambrosia had lived there for a very long time. Jake wasn't sure if she was a native of Quinn Valley, but she'd been there long enough that he considered her one. He was watching the back of the church when the doors opened and his mother was walking with Ambrosia down the aisle. Jake was a bit confused, but it was Ambrosia's wedding after all, and there was no telling what could happen. Ambrosia was wearing a long, flowing dress that looked more like it would be appropriate for an ancient Greek muse than a wedding. She wore her glasses that made her eyes look 10 times bigger than they were, and she walked slowly, clinging to April Lynn Quinn's arm. When they reached the front of the church, Blake asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" "I give myself. April Lynn is just here to help me keep from passing out." Ambrosia sounded as normal as she ever did. Jake grinned at his mother, who couldn't help but hide a smile. He had never thought of Ambrosia as someone who was close to his mother, but she was one of those people who would do anything for anyone, and she'd been asked to help, so she was there. Ambrosia stepped forward and stood beside Jackson. "You'd better behave." "We're in a church," she hissed at him. Everyone heard what she said, and there was muffled laughter from the wedding party and half-dozen guests. Blake looked a little bit nervous about this wedding, but he plowed forward. "We're gathered here to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." When it was time for Jackson to recite his vows, he pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "Ambrosia, I have been waiting my entire life for a woman like you to come into it. You are beautiful, smart, and you always bring a smile to my face. I'm blessed to have you as a bride, and I hope for a long and happy marriage together." Ambrosia sniffed loudly, pulling out her own vows. "Jackson, you make me absolutely crazy. I never know if you're going to show up outside my door, caterwauling to the tune of a mariachi band, or if you're going to bring me the most beautiful ring I've ever seen. You keep me guessing every day. So, I'm proud to be your wife, but if you don't behave yourself, you're going to find a crystal in a place that will be difficult to explain to the doctor." Blake looked stunned, but he pressed on, obviously not knowing what else to do in the moment. Ambrosia was not a typical bride, by any means. When he pronounced them man and wife, Jackson grabbed Ambrosia and kissed her soundly, a little too soundly for the onlookers, but it was nice to see how happy they were. Jake realized he had known Melinda a short while longer than Jackson had known Ambrosia. It was strange how quickly the other couple's relationship had progressed. Jake felt like his was going awfully fast, but it seemed ridiculously slow in comparison. After the kiss, Ambrosia announced to everyone there, "Thanks for coming. There's no reception, because Jackson and I are eager to take care of my flower. I'll have a 10% off everything in the store next week to celebrate." With that, the newlyweds left the church, and everyone else just stared at each other for a moment, wondering what had just happened. Finally, April Lynn started laughing. "Now, that's what I call a wedding. Are you and Riley going to have one just like it on Saturday?" she asked Blake. "A million times no. Riley and I will do things a little more traditionally than they did." Blake shrugged. "But they seem happy, and I'm not going to say anything about it." "Why would I? It was their wedding, not mine." Jake smiled, pleased with the pastor's live and let live philosophy about the whole thing. He was glad he wasn't going to be saddled with a preachy brother-in-law. "All right. I think I'm taking Melinda to a movie now. Since we're all dressed up with nowhere to go." Melinda shook her head at him. "You could ask, you know." April Lynn smiled. "My son is one who has always told everyone around him what to do. I swear he came out talking, telling the doctor that he should have done things differently during the delivery." "You lie, Mom, but I love you anyway." Jake kissed April Lynn's cheek and then went and took Melinda's hand. "Let's go see a movie. We'll eat popcorn and Sour Patch Kids and throw things if the movie is bad." "I'm not sure that's exactly the way we want to do things." Melinda followed him out. "I don't want to get kicked out of the only movie theater in the valley." "I don't know why not. It's more fun to watch movies from the comfort of your own home anyway." "Then why exactly are we going to the movies?" she asked. "Because sometimes it's interesting to watch things on the big screen. Besides, I have to see Lion King in a theater. It would lose something if we saw it on television." Melinda shrugged, not really caring. She'd expected the wedding to last longer, so she had no other plans. A movie sounded as good as anything else. "Okay. We'll watch Lion King. I have nothing better to do." "Will Kaz get jealous of me taking up all your time?" "Absolutely, but he'll survive it." After the movie, he took her to the pub for dinner. "When you have the new healthier menu options, we'll eat at the hotel more." "I guess that's a good idea," she said. "I don't much care either way. The bad thing about a chef eating at their own restaurant is if there's a problem, people will come to me to solve it. Here I'm sort of incognito." "Oh, that reminds me." He pulled his name tag out of his pocket and put it on his dress shirt. "Can't risk Bobling coming out and taking over. I'm Jake." "Are you admitting to having a dual personality with two different names?" "Nope. Not at all. I admit nothing about anything." He grinned at her, taking her hand in his. "Thanks for being my date today. You have to admit Ambrosia's vows were amazing." "They were. And a little scary. I worry about her." Melinda knew the woman was known for her eccentricities, though. "I hope they're really happy together. We'll all know it if they aren't. Ambrosia isn't known to suffer anything in silence." "No, she's not." Melinda studied her menu, trying to decide on something she wanted. She really did prefer to cook herself, but she could find something she was sure. She was just happy to be able to spend an afternoon with Jake. Chapter 9. Jake and Melinda ate together every day for lunch that week, and Melinda found herself a little less nervous about the wedding as they did. Hopefully everyone would be happy with what she made for the reception and no one would find reason to complain. When Saturday morning dawned, she was up early, cooking the 3 meal choices and filling the restaurant's kitchen with wonderful aromas. The decision had been made to close the restaurant for the breakfast and lunch shifts so that the wedding could be top priority for the day. It was shortly after the reception was due to begin when Melinda sent her catering staff down to the reception with the food she'd made. Everything was going according to plan. She hurried home to shower, changed into something appropriate for the reception, and went back to join the festivities. As soon as she got to the hotel, she stopped short. Jake was slow dancing with a woman she'd never seen before, and she had to wonder who it was. She walked to the ballroom, where the party was taking place, and stood for a moment just inside the door, her eyes on Jake and the woman. From in front of her, she heard two of the older ladies in town, whom she knew were friends with his grandmother, discussing Jake and the woman who was in his arms. "I always thought Bobling would marry Felicia. They made such a great couple. I think we all thought they'd marry straight out of high school and have a family. But then Bobling went off to join the Marines and she went to college. It's nice to see them together again." Melinda closed her eyes for a moment, wondering if she should just leave. Why would Bobling want her there when he obviously had someone he loved in his arms? She stood uncertain for a short while before April Lynn hurried over to her. "The food is wonderful, Melinda. Bobling has been wandering around looking lost without you. But he's been dancing with some woman." April Lynn shook her head. "Trust me, he thinks a lot more of you than he does of Felicia." "Glad to hear it." She wasn't convinced, but she wasn't going to tell April Lynn that. It just felt strange to see a man she had started to think of as hers dancing so closely with another woman. She walked in and looked around, noting that most of the dishes, served as a potluck, were close to empty. That was good for her to see. She fixed herself a plate and found a place to sit where no one was already spread out. She was halfway through her meal when Jake joined her. "You should have come and found me, and I would have shown you my table. I saved you a seat." She smiled and nodded. "You looked busy, so I just found food and took a seat. I'll be finished eating in a few minutes, and I'll move to your table then." Jake immediately sat down beside her. The food was fabulous. Everyone was talking about it. And they got a big kick out of Siren Sapapillas as well. "I'm glad it was a hit." Melinda took another bite of her food, pleased that they'd chosen the sausage casserole as one of the dishes. It truly was delicious. "How was the wedding?" "I hate that I couldn't be there, but my job was food." "It was good. They didn't write their own vows, so it wasn't the best wedding I've been to this week, but it was still good." She laughed. "Were Ambrosia and Jackson there?" "Not at all. I've texted with Jackson only once this week, and he said Ambrosia closed the shop all week and they're being honeymooners. I was afraid to ask anything, because he may have told me something I didn't want to know." He shook his head. "Details are not something I'm interested in." Melinda laughed softly. "I'm glad you know him well enough to know when to ask questions and when not to." "Me too." Jake shook his head. "Mom made me promise not to wear a name tag today, and I've been called Bobling more times than I can count. I'm going to start carrying some of Ambrosia's crystals to throw at people's heads. I'm sure it'll help my stress levels." "I hope so. You get kind of feisty when people call you Bobling." "It's not my name, and it's absolutely ridiculous to call a grown man that." "Ugh." He shook his head. "I want to grab the microphone from the band and announce that I will be taking my aggression out on everyone who calls me Bobling from this day forward. Not sure how my grandmother would react, though. Probably not terribly well." She finished eating, and he took her hand. "Let's dance." "All right." She didn't know where Felicia had gone, but she didn't care. She wanted to concentrate on dancing with him, not worrying that he had another woman on the line. Together, they went out to the dance floor, and he held her close as they danced to a slow country song. He pulled her toward him, knowing his entire family was watching but not really caring. When the song finished, he leaned down and kissed her, right there in the middle of the dance floor. When he heard applause, he looked up to see his sisters and all of his cousins who were there clapping for them. Instead of being embarrassed, which would have invited the vulture-like family members to tease him worse, He took Melinda's hand and bowed for them. Melinda was red-faced, and he whispered, "Play along with it, or they'll tease you worse." Melinda sank into a deep curtsy, as if she was being presented to the Queen of England. He was definitely impressed. "For our next number," Jake called, "we will walk back to our table." He gave them all a royal wave as he led Melinda across the room. Siren was sitting at their table, and he nodded to Jake. "You couldn't have handled that better. I can't let them harass me all night and all day." "And they would." Siren nodded emphatically. "No doubt in my mind they would. Your cousins are lovely people, but there," he was obviously struggling for the right word. "Vulture-like?" Jake asked. "That's what I was thinking when I was trying to decide how to handle their ridiculousness. You know, I think that cuts it. Individually, I like all of your cousins. As a group, they're scary." Siren shook his head. Melinda laughed. "And here I always envy you your family." "Don't," Jake said with a grin. His mother came over to the table then, his grandma Gertie right behind her. Grandma sat down and looked back and forth between Jake and Melinda. "Bobling, am I hearing wedding bells off in the distance?" Jake got an alarmed look on his face. "I don't know, Grandma. Have you checked your hearing aids? Are you maybe suffering from some strange disease that makes you hear wedding bells?" "You know as well as I do what I mean." Grandma swatted at Jake with her hand. "How serious are you and Melinda?" Jake shrugged. "Well, we've known one another for approximately 2 weeks, so I guess according to family credo, it's time for me to propose." He looked at Melinda. "You wouldn't mind marrying me and having 5 babies, would you?" He kept his voice casual, knowing it would make his grandmother crazy. Melinda looked slightly panicked, but she played along. "Well, I've always wanted 5 kids, but I'm not sure I could be saddled with a man named Bobling. Now, if your name were Jake, the decision would be a lot easier." Jake grinned, admiring her a great deal more for her comeback. "Maybe I could change my name to Jake, then." Grandma Gertie shook her head at him. "Fine. I'll do my best to remember to call you Jake, but you've been Bobling your whole life, and I'm your grandmother. I used to change your diapers. I would say that I hope you've grown in certain places since those days, but I wouldn't want to be indelicate." With those words, she wandered away from the table, leaving April Lynn laughing hysterically. "Oh, man. I want to be just like her when I grow up." "Do you think she gives lessons?" April Lynn watched her mother-in-law walk across the room, her eyes filling with unshed tears from laughing so hard. Jake sighed. "Probably. Go away, Mom. I'm trying to be the perfect gentleman you taught me to be." "That was your father. I taught you to be perfectly you." April Lynn winked at him and wandered away toward the newlywed couples, who were about to cut their separate cakes. "Those cakes are beautiful," Melinda said. "The bakery in town?" "I actually have no idea. I just got back to town a little over a week ago, remember?" Jake shrugged. "I think you know more about the wedding food planning than I do." "Maybe." She shrugged. "Next Saturday, my grandmother is having a big family thing to welcome me home. There will be ridiculously competitive games, food, and fun. You interested?" Jake asked. "I'm not sure. Would it send the wrong message if I were to go to a family gathering?" she asked nervously. "No, not at all. I think it would send the right message." He was already thinking about a ring for her, but he wouldn't admit it to any of his family members, who would ridicule him for the rest of his life. That startled her a little, but she nodded. "Then I'll be there." She didn't know why he wouldn't take Felicia, but she would go. She loved his family. They spent the rest of the day dancing and enjoying themselves. By the time the reception was over, Melinda was getting hungry again, and she was very peopled out. She wanted to be home. Do you want to go out for supper? He asked. Melinda shook her head. Not tonight. I just want to go home. Jake frowned. He was disappointed in her answer. I'm going to be moving all day tomorrow, so I can't see you after church. He wanted to, but it wasn't feasible. Melinda wondered if he'd made plans to spend the day with Felicia instead. But if he had, would he invite her to his family's welcome home party? She had no idea. He offered her a ride home, and she gladly accepted. Her feet were sorer than she'd like to admit after all the dancing they'd done. When they reached her house, he walked her to the door, kissing her softly. I hate we can't spend the day together tomorrow. Really? She asked. Really? Why would I say something I don't mean? I'm a pretty honest man. I was going to cook myself something for supper. I don't want to be around a lot of people tonight, because I spent enough time in a crowd today. Do you want to have supper with me? That sounds great. What are you making? I have no earthly idea. She opened the door and led the way to the kitchen, digging in her fridge. I have some ground beef thawed. I could make burgers? Or spaghetti with meat sauce? Spaghetti sounds good, if it's not too much trouble. He pulled out one of the stools from her counter, sitting down. He knew she wouldn't let him help, and he would enjoy watching her work. Not at all. Melinda had spaghetti sauce she'd made herself in a jar, and she pulled it out and set it next to the stove. No ragu? Jake asked. She laughed. In a pinch, I've been known to use ragu, but I prefer my homemade sauce. He eyed the jar. Does it have mushrooms? I'm allergic to mushrooms. No mushrooms. Any other food allergies I should be aware of? Nope. Just mushrooms. He watched as she browned the meat with a little onion that she had chopped previously and put into a baggie. Do you always keep onion pre-chopped in your fridge? I love onion for flavoring, but I hate chopping it up. So, I do a bunch all at once and baggie it. Works for me. I do that with a lot of things. I'm all about a quick prep meal, and I prep everything I can so I can do things fast. Jake grinned. I have to wonder if my mother knew your tricks if she would cook more, or if she'd still have let us all starve as kids. She let you starve? Melinda asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, there was one night when I asked what was for supper. She said that I could make a sandwich as well as she could, and I ended up making sandwiches for both of us. I felt neglected. Don't you think you're being just a little dramatic? He shrugged. You sound like my mother. She always accuses me of being dramatic as well. Melinda decided not to feed into his drama. She was not a fan of drama, and she didn't need to be around a drama llama. As she cooked, she hummed under her breath, and he watched her with a silly smile. Finally, she looked at him. What are you grinning at? You look so cute when you cook. Really? You're losing your mind, Jake. Probably. It's not like that's new information, though, is it? She grinned. I guess it's not. I mean, you did answer to Bobling for 18 years. Why do I like you so much? He asked. You do nothing but make fun of me. I guess you're just a masochist. And you love my cooking. What man doesn't want to marry a chef? She shrugged. Being a chef didn't make her sought after by men, but it did make her happy. Jake shook his head. You know, I never thought about the kind of woman I wanted to marry before I met you. Her heart started beating faster. Is that so? And now you wonder? I guess I do. But being a chef definitely puts a positive spin on your chances. You make yourself sound like a lottery prize. She got out a teaspoon and tasted the sauce. It's perfect. We'll let that cook while the spaghetti does its thing, and we'll be eating in a few minutes. She moved to the stool beside him. So, moving tomorrow, huh? He nodded. Now that Riley's made an honest man out of the good Reverend, I'm going to move into her rent house. I will move immediately after church. I don't have a whole lot of stuff, but I'm sure ready to not live with my parents anymore. I was on my own for way too long for that to work for more than a few days. I can see that. Do you want help moving? She asked. He thought about it for a minute. Dusty is going to help me, and I don't have a lot to begin with. There's nothing for you to help with. But maybe you could come over tomorrow evening and I'll order pizza. We can christen the new house with pizza. She laughed, shaking her head. Why don't I come over, and we'll make pizza together? I can do the crust and the sauce, and then we'll each add whatever toppings we want. That sounds brilliant, and then you can't tell me that you're always the one to cook, because I'll help. I guess that's true. She got up and checked the spaghetti, draining it and putting a pile onto a plate, ladling some of the sauce over it. More sauce or less? A little more, if you don't mind. I love lots of sauce. Me too. She did as he asked, before handing him his plate. Then she made herself a plate of spaghetti, the same way. This is my go-to meal when I'm in a hurry. The sauce is made, so I can have everything done in under 30 minutes. He took a bite and smiled. I like your spaghetti. Why do I only eat Italian food at your house? He asked. Because that's what I've happened to make while you're here. I promise, I do make other things. I know. I've eaten at your restaurant, and you made food for the reception today. That's why I was surprised that you only feed me Italian at your house. Well, someday soon, I'll make you my shepherd's pie. It's to die for. Jake grinned. Hey, you keep feeding me, and I'll keep showing up. Like a stray cat? Sure. Melinda shook her head. I'm not sure I'm ready to feed another cat all the time. If you adopt me, I won't be a stray anymore. Are we still talking about me feeding you when you show up at my house? Melinda asked. She was missing something in their conversation. You tell me. Jake grinned at her. You're helping with the dishes, because you're making difficult mealtime conversation. That's all there is to it. Fine. I'll help with the dishes. I'm good at dishes. You are? Not really, but we'll pretend I am. How's that? She sighed. There are only a few things to hand wash. You can dry them. All right. I'm willing to learn. As he left for the evening, he caught her by the hips and pulled her to him, kissing her deeply. Tomorrow night. Pizza. My place. He caressed her cheek. I want to just stick you in my pocket and take you home with me. I don't think I'd fit in your pocket. Are you confusing me with someone else? The girl he'd been dancing with had been no more than 5 feet tall, and she'd been slender. It made her want to poke the other woman's eyes out. Melinda was tall, and she envied short women. Of course, she knew a lot of short women who envied her. I'm sure. You're just perfect for my pocket, Melinda. He kissed her once more and went to his truck. There was nothing about her that didn't make him want to keep her. Melinda watched him drive away, wondering again about Felicia. He hadn't mentioned her, and she wished he would. Melinda needed to know where she stood, but she didn't think it was time for the "where are we going" talk. She'd just have to wait and see. She hated waiting. Chapter 10. The following evening, Jake stood and looked around his house, satisfied with his choice. The house was furnished, and it was very easy for him to just bring in the few things he had and settle in. It was small, only 1 bedroom and 1 bath, but it was certainly enough for one person. He was happy that he was transitioning back into civilian life so completely. He wasn't sure he would be able to forget the regimented life he'd lived in the military and move on so quickly. Melinda was there a short while later with the things she needed for the pizzas. "Do you cook at all?" she asked as she started mixing up the dough. He shrugged. "I've been known to make simple things." "Can you brown ground beef?" "That's not too complicated for me. I won't even burn it." "Probably. You are your mother's son." "Well, since ground beef goes into lasagna, she's really good at ground beef." Melinda laughed, shaking her head. "Your father must not have married her for her cooking skills." "If he did, he'd be awfully disappointed," Jake told her. He got out a frying pan and started to work on the ground beef, while she finished the dough. "We have to let it rise for a little while," she said. "Then we'll smush it out into dough. I brought a variety of toppings. I'm going to make up some more meat when I'm done." "What kinds?" She listed the different things she'd brought. "I didn't bring mushrooms, but I have onions, green peppers, red peppers, and several other pizza veggies. Then we'll make some meats. We can each choose what we want on our own personal-sized pizza." "Sounds delicious." When they sat down to eat an hour later, he was thrilled. "This is really good. Thanks for the suggestion." "Happy to do it. I like the pizza place in town, but I always prefer my own cooking." "I don't blame you. I prefer your cooking, too, so you may cook every meal for me for the rest of my life." Melinda felt like he was starting to talk about forever a lot. Did he mean it? Or did he just talk that way? She hadn't noticed it before, but it was odd. "I'll get right on that." She helped him with the dishes, and they watched another superhero movie together before she left. "Is the gym ready?" she asked. "I'll have everything in place and ready to go by the end of the day tomorrow." "Then can I come in for my first session on Tuesday morning?" Melinda asked, wanting to get started. "Absolutely." "What time?" 9 is good. I work at 11. "All right. I'll be there, and we'll get it done." He leaned down and kissed her softly. "I think I'm addicted to your kisses." "I don't think you could be. Because I'm addicted to yours." "I'll see you tomorrow for lunch." He frowned. "Oh, wait. You didn't bring a car, did you?" "No, but I'm perfectly capable of walking." "That's true, but I will feel better driving you. I don't like you walking alone at night." She shrugged. "All right." As he watched her go into her house and lock the door, he thought about how strong his feelings were and how quickly they were going. It wasn't how he'd seen his life going as soon as he got home, but he couldn't really complain. She was really special after all. Asterisk. When Jake finished the gym the following afternoon, he was thrilled. He walked down to his father's office. "Dad, you can put the gym on the website now, and you can offer my personal training." "You finished it?" Bob asked his only son. "I did." "When do you want to start working out with me?" Jake asked. "Bobling, I know you love what you do, but working out has never been something I enjoy. Whether you enjoy it or not, I'm going to insist you work with me a minimum of 3 times per week. You need to get your heart healthy again. You're my son, not my doctor." "But your doctor told you the same thing, didn't he?" Jake knew his father had been told that exercise would help his heart. "That's what doctors always told heart patients." "I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'll make you an appointment for tomorrow at 8. Meet me in the gym." "I won't be there." Jake smiled. "Don't make me pull out the big guns. You can't threaten me. You're my son." Bob glared at Jake. Jake just smiled, walking out of his father's office. As soon as he was out, he called his mother. "Mom, I know you're busy." "I am, but what's up?" His mother's voice was calm but concerned. "Dad won't agree to work out with me, and we both know it would be the best thing for his heart. I put him on the schedule for 8 tomorrow morning. Will you make sure he keeps the appointment? I will try. Call your grandmother as well. Between the three of us, we'll make sure he's there and does what he needs to do. Jake grinned. Thanks, Mom. The line went dead then, but he knew his mother was with a client, so he wasn't worried about it. A quick call to his grandmother had her promise that she would give her son a call that evening, and Jake felt as if his job was done. No one could convince his dad to do something like his mother and grandmother. Asterisk. At 8 the next morning, Jake met with his unhappy father at the gym. I can't believe you talked to your mother and my mother. What is wrong with you? We men have to stick together. I am sticking with you. I'm keeping you alive so you can get to know your grandchildren. Jake led his father to a treadmill. We're going to start with a walk on the treadmill. An hour later, his father was sweaty and grumpy, but he thanked Jake. I don't know that I ever would have agreed to this, but you're right. It's what I need from my heart. I know it is. I'll see you Friday at the same time. Bob groaned, but he nodded. I'll be here. Jake looked over at Melinda, who had arrived in the last 5 minutes of his father's session. I hope you're not as difficult to work with as my father. He eyed her in the tight leggings she was wearing, admiring her body. Not at all. I want to be here. He walked over to the weights and started her on them. I know you walk every day. You get your cardio. I think we need to concentrate on strength training with you. I agree. You just keep practicing saying that, and we'll get along great. Melinda sighed. You keep dreaming. Asterisk. On Saturday, Jake picked Melinda up at 10 to drive her to his grandparents' house. He'd forgotten to tell Melinda to bring something to eat, so he stopped and grabbed a couple bags of chips and some dip. When he got to Melinda's, she had a Tupperware bowl in her hands. I made some potato salad. I didn't want to just be dead weight. I grabbed a couple bags of chips and some dip as our contribution. She sighed. I'm a chef. We can do better than chips and dip. We can, sure, but we don't have to. Let me know in advance next time. I'll tell you now that all of these things at my grandmother's are potluck, and everyone is expected to bring something. How's that? Melinda frowned. Does your grandmother do these things often? Just for every single holiday you can imagine. Seriously, Columbus Day is huge with my grandmother. Jake shook his head. I have a hard time believing that I actually missed all these family get-togethers. Wow. I had no idea you guys got together for everything like that. Oh, yeah. And your mud in Grandma's eyes if you don't make it. So, everyone tries to be there. She'll probably say something to me about all the parties I missed while I was in the military. Melinda smiled at that. I hope she gives you heck. She will. No doubt. He shook his head. I have a huge, strange family. Why am I here? She asked, needing to come right out and ask. Why didn't you bring Felicia? She'd been holding in her worries about the other woman for a week, and she needed them assuaged. Felicia? She's getting married next week to some guy she met in college. He gave her a strange look. What makes you ask about Felicia? When I got to the wedding last week, you were dancing with a woman I'd never seen. Then a couple of older women were talking about the two of you together. They thought you two should have married right out of high school. We went on like 4 dates in high school, but one of them was prom, and we were voted king and queen. Even then, I knew I was going into the Marines, and she knew she was going to college. There was never anything between us. Not serious at least. So, you're not planning to dump me and run off and marry her? Not at all. He shook his head. In fact, I was planning to ask if you wanted to spend the rest of your life with me, because I'm in love with you. You can't ask me something like that so casually. Melinda stared at him in shock. Are you serious? He nodded. I've been hinting about it for a week. But we've known each other for only a couple of weeks. And I've known I was in love with you for half that time. As far as our relationship goes, that's forever. You've lost your mind, Jake. Bobling. Quinn. Jake tilted his head to one side. Is that a no? Of course not. That's a yes, though I feel like I've lost my mind when I say it. Melinda looked at him for a moment, realizing that it didn't matter how long they'd known one another. What mattered was how much they felt for each other. I love you, too, by the way. He parked the truck in his grandmother's driveway and reached for her, kissing her quickly. Okay, so I need you to help me with my outfit. She tilted her head to one side. Are you wearing your Marine uniform? Nope. Something better. They got out of the vehicle, and he went around to the back and pulled out a large sandwich sign. It read, "Hello, my name is Jake." Melinda looked at it and started laughing. Trying to make your feelings known? Yup. He grinned, knowing she understood, and that pleased him. Help me get this thing on. When they stepped into the house a few minutes later, she laughed as everyone looked at him in shock. Hopefully this will help everyone remember to call me Jake, he said. His grandmother shook her head at him. You go away for years and come back with a different name. How are we supposed to remember? Just read the sign, Grandma. He pulled Melinda forward. Have you met my fiancé? Grandma Gertie forgot all about the sign her grandson was wearing and clapped her hand over her mouth. Oh, I knew it the first time I saw the two of you together. More Quinn babies. Melinda frowned. I'm not sure I want children. There was a great deal of laughter following her statement, and she looked at Jake with surprise. Why are they laughing? Every generation of Quinns has 5 children. Never any more or any less. Birth control doesn't change a thing, from what I understand. She gaped at him with surprise. Seriously? Seriously. Still want to marry me? Melinda looked from him to his grinning relatives that filled the kitchen. Can I get a nanny? He laughed. I'll get you 2 if that's what you want. Then yes, I still want to marry you, but you could have let me know before I agreed to marry you. Jake shrugged. Sorry about that. I thought everyone in town knew how strange our family was with the whole 5 kids per generation thing. Melinda frowned. Most probably do. But I didn't. Well, you do now. Jake looked over at his mother. You finally get a daughter-in-law. And the very one I would have handpicked for you. April Lynn sighed happily. I don't have to worry about the next generation anymore. That's the last of my brood, engaged and ready to marry. When? Melinda shrugged. Next week? Then we don't have to do anything huge. That would make me so happy. April Lynn took the potato salad from her hands and linked arms with Melinda. Now, let's go talk wedding plans. This is going to be fun. Jake didn't care that the women were planning his future. As long as Melinda was going to be his wife, there was no doubt he'd be the happiest man alive. Epilogue. 5 years later, April Lynn sat with her grandchildren all around her. There were 10 and 2 more on the way. Her greatest joy was those children along with their parents, but really, it was mostly the grandchildren. Her lasagna was in the oven, and they were doing their small family celebration on Christmas Eve, so that they could head to her in-laws' house for Christmas Day. She glanced up as Melinda walked in, just a bit rounder than Renee. I put the garlic bread in the oven, Melinda said. I also made a salad, and I made some raspberry lemonade. Dessert is ready to put in the oven as soon as we take the garlic bread out. That sounds lovely, April Lynn said. Bobling, Jake, had made her so happy when he'd married a chef. Her lasagna was still great, but sometimes they each made their lasagnas. It was just nice not to have the burden of cooking everything every day of her life. No, Melinda was definitely a welcome addition to the family. She sighed contentedly as she looked around her at all the Quinns. And more were definitely coming. Her heart was full.